Emily Harper had always loved visiting the city zoo on weekends, but recently, her visits had taken on a deeper meaning than just watching animals or enjoying a quiet escape from her predictable life with Daniel, her husband of 7 years. Their marriage was stable, comfortable, but Emily felt an invisible distance growing between them, a quiet loneliness she couldn't shake no matter how hard she tried to ignore it. Daniel worked long hours at his corporate job, often coming home exhausted and preoccupied, leaving Emily to fill the empty evenings with chores, television, or books that failed to hold her attention. On one bright, sunny Saturday, she found herself wandering deeper into the zoo than usual, drawn toward the primate section, which she had always found fascinating. There was something about the gorillas, strong, gentle, intelligent, that captivated her in a way humans no longer seemed to. One particular gorilla, a massive silverback named Coda, stood out. His eyes seemed unusually expressive, almost human, and when Emily approached the enclosure, she felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. Over the weeks, she began visiting Coda more often, standing at the railing and speaking softly, telling him about her day, her worries, and her frustrations, though it sounded silly when she said it out loud. She laughed quietly at his playful gestures, mimicked his motions, and imagined that he understood her more than anyone else ever had, even Daniel. At first, it was innocent, a harmless connection with a creature she admired for his strength and presence, but over time, Emily noticed an unexpected pull, a warmth in her chest whenever she saw him. She started to anticipate these moments, feeling alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. The zoo became her secret sanctuary, a place where she could release the pent-up emotions she buried in her marriage, a place where she felt seen and understood without judgment. One afternoon, she arrived earlier than usual, carrying a small bag with snacks for herself and a few fruits she knew Coda loved. The air was crisp, filled with birdsong and children's laughter in the distance, but Emily barely noticed the world around her. Her focus was entirely on him. As she approached, Coda moved closer to the glass, his deep eyes meeting hers, and she felt a shiver of connection that surprised her. She spoke softly, her words tumbling out in a mixture of confession and laughter, sharing thoughts she hadn't shared with Daniel in months. She laughed at a funny face he made, and for a fleeting moment, she forgot all the pressures of her life, all the quiet loneliness that had been gnawing at her heart. She could stay like this forever, she thought, lost in this unusual, comforting bond. But that calm, private world shattered in an instant when a voice behind her froze her in place. "Emily, what's going on here?" It was Daniel. She hadn't heard him approach, hadn't sensed the heavy weight of his presence until the words landed between them. Emily turned slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. She could see the shock in his eyes, mixed with confusion and hurt, emotions she wasn't ready to face. Her mind raced, searching for words to explain, to justify this strange attachment, but the truth felt too complicated to voice. I'm just talking to him," she managed, gesturing toward Coda, feeling ridiculous even as she said it. Daniel's gaze flicked between her and the gorilla, disbelief clear on his face. There was no anger yet, only stunned confusion, and that made Emily feel more exposed than she had ever felt before. She wanted to laugh at the absurdity, to brush it off as silly, but inside, her chest ached with the weight of vulnerability. Daniel stepped closer, his hands slightly trembling, and Emily noticed for the first time how tense he had become. "Emily, you've changed," he said quietly, and there was a pause, a silence that carried more meaning than words ever could. Emily's eyes filled with tears, not from shame, but from the strange relief of finally being seen, not for a secret or a mistake, but for the raw emotions she had kept hidden for so long. She wanted to explain that her connection with Coda wasn't about replacing him or loving him instead of Daniel, it was about feeling alive again, feeling noticed in a way she hadn't in years. Daniel's expression softened slightly, and though confusion lingered, there was something else there too, a dawning awareness of his own neglect, a recognition of the emotional distance that had grown between them. The zoo, the gorilla, and this moment of confrontation became a mirror, reflecting back the cracks in their marriage that neither had acknowledged before. Emily wanted to reach for his hand, to bridge the gap that had widened over years of routine and unspoken frustration, but she hesitated, unsure of how he would respond to her raw honesty. Daniel's eyes lingered on her face, searching, and Emily realized that in that moment, something fundamental had shifted. It wasn't just about a gorilla or a secret visit, it was about the need for connection, attention, and understanding that had gone unfulfilled between them for far too long. The sunlight glinted off Koda's fur, and for a brief second, the world seemed suspended, the chaos of emotions held in a delicate balance. Emily felt her heart race, knowing that everything had changed with Daniel's arrival, that there was no turning back to the comfortable ignorance of before. She wanted to speak, to explain herself fully, to make him understand that this wasn't betrayal but an emotional awakening, but the right words were elusive, lost in the storm of her feelings. Daniel finally exhaled, a long, low sound, and for the first time in months, Emily saw him as more than just her husband. She saw him as a man capable of surprise, capable of emotion, capable of acknowledging her humanity. The bond she had felt with Koda was not something she could quantify or fully explain, but it had forced a confrontation with truth, a truth that she and Daniel both needed to face. As the children's laughter echoed faintly in the distance and the zoo visitors moved obliviously around them, Emily felt a mixture of fear and relief, anticipation and dread. Their marriage had been tested in an unexpected, almost absurd way, and yet, there was a fragile thread of hope woven through the confusion, a sense that perhaps this shocking moment could lead them back to one another. Emily looked at Daniel, her heart full of emotion, her lips trembling slightly, and in that silent exchange, a question hung between them: how would they move forward? Could this moment of vulnerability and shock be the spark that reignited the warmth and connection they had lost? Or would it become a memory of embarrassment and misunderstanding that drove an unbridgeable wedge between them? She didn't know, but one thing was certain: nothing would ever be quite the same again. The zoo, the gorilla, and the confrontation had awakened something in both of them, something raw, emotional, and deeply human, and Emily realized that the journey back to love would require courage, honesty, and the willingness to see each other fully, beyond habits, routines, and the comfortable distance of years. And as she stood there, frozen but alive with emotion, she understood that this was only the beginning of a story that would challenge, surprise, and ultimately transform them both, a story that neither could predict, but both were now a part of. Whether they were ready or not, the moments after Daniel's sudden appearance at the zoo left Emily reeling, her chest tight with a mix of embarrassment, fear, and lingering excitement, emotions she had never expected to confront so openly. She tried to find words to explain herself, but each time her lips parted, they closed again, heavy with the weight of anticipation and the knowledge that any explanation might sound absurd or even childish to him, and yet, she couldn't hide the truth. Koda had become her silent companion, a creature who seemed to understand her in ways Daniel had unknowingly neglected, a being whose presence had made her feel alive, playful, and noticed at the same time, emotions she hadn't realized she craved so deeply until she felt their absence in the empty spaces of her life. And now, faced with Daniel's shocked gaze, those emotions tangled with guilt, longing, and the undeniable thrill of being seen in her most vulnerable state, she tried again, voice trembling slightly: "Daniel, it's not what it looks like. I needed someone to listen, to understand," and though the words were careful, they carried the honesty she had buried for so long, and Daniel's eyes softened, the initial shock giving way to confusion and an unexpected flicker of concern as he processed her confession, realizing that this moment was not about betrayal in the way he had feared, but about a deeper, emotional distance he had allowed to grow between them, a gap that Koda, in his silent, patient way, had somehow filled, and that awareness stirred something protective in him, a desire to bridge the rift that had formed quietly over the years. Emily noticed the subtle change in his posture, the way his hands relaxed slightly, the tension in his jaw easing, and in that instant, she understood that the conversation ahead would not be easy, yet it was necessary, a reckoning born not from wrongdoing but from neglect and unmet emotional needs, and she felt a flicker of hope that perhaps this surreal, almost absurd moment could become a turning point rather than a point of rupture, and she spoke again, this time a little more steadily, explaining how her weekends at the zoo had become a refuge, a place to speak her mind, to laugh, to cry quietly without judgment, and how Koda, in his silent companionship, had reflected back emotions she had long forgotten existed within her, the innocence of it underscoring the absurdity yet highlighting the intensity of her feelings, and Daniel listened, truly listened, the way he hadn't for months, maybe even years, and that alone began to melt the walls of distance that had separated them. He asked questions, gentle yet probing, seeking to understand, not to accuse, and Emily answered honestly, admitting that her attachment had grown gradually, that it was never about replacing him, never about seeking romantic fulfillment from a gorilla, but about reconnecting with a part of herself that had been ignored, stifled by the routine and expectations of married life, and as she spoke, she saw Daniel's expression shift from confusion to comprehension, a mixture of relief and introspection passing across his face as he realized that he had missed the subtle cues of her loneliness, the small signals of discontent that had gone unnoticed because of work, distraction, and assumptions about their life together. The air between them, once charged with tension and uncertainty, began to feel charged with possibility. The possibility that this bizarre, unexpected incident could catalyze the emotional honesty they had both been avoiding, and Emily felt her heart swell with cautious hope as Daniel reached out, placing a tentative hand on her arm, a gesture of connection, reassurance, and willingness to engage rather than retreat, and the warmth of his touch brought tears to her eyes, not from shame but from the profound relief of being understood, of having her vulnerability met with empathy rather than judgment. They stood there in the fading afternoon light, the sounds of the zoo around them fading into a background hum as they navigated this delicate moment, speaking in hushed tones about their feelings, past misunderstandings, and the loneliness that had crept into their marriage unnoticed, and Emily realized that the emotional bond she had formed with Coda had been a mirror, showing her what she truly needed from Daniel: attention, presence, and emotional intimacy, and the recognition that both of them had drifted apart not because of a lack of love but because of complacency, routine, and the unspoken assumption that their connection would endure without effort, and that understanding brought with it a sense of urgency, a desire to repair, reconnect, and rediscover the love that had once been vibrant and alive. Daniel admitted his own failings, acknowledging that he had become wrapped up in work and responsibilities, overlooking the quiet signals that Emily had been sending for years, and Emily listened, her heart softening as she realized that his remorse was genuine, that his willingness to see her fully, flaws, desires, and all, was a sign that the foundation of their marriage was not lost but merely in need of attention and care, and in that shared acknowledgement, the tension began to dissolve, replaced by a fragile yet growing sense of hope and possibility. They talked for what felt like hours, walking through the zoo paths, sharing memories, laughing softly at the absurdity of the situation, and noticing for the first time in months that their dialogue could be honest, vulnerable, and yet safe, a rare and precious combination. And as they circled back to the gorilla enclosure, Emily felt no guilt, only clarity, realizing that Coda's role in her life had always been symbolic, a reminder of the emotional engagement she craved, and that now, with Daniel present and emotionally available, she could channel that need into rebuilding their connection, rather than seeking it elsewhere. Daniel looked at her with a mixture of amusement, tenderness, and disbelief, saying softly, "I never imagined our marriage would be tested by a gorilla, but I understand now," and Emily laughed through her tears, feeling a lightness she hadn't felt in years, the absurdity of the situation blending seamlessly with the depth of the emotional revelation, and in that laughter, she felt a spark of renewed intimacy, a thread of connection ready to be strengthened through care, attention, and shared vulnerability. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over the zoo, Emily and Daniel held hands, walking together, not as distant spouses but as two people willing to see, listen, and love each other fully again, with the memory of the silverback serving as both a reminder of how fragile love can be and a symbol of the awakening that made their renewed bond possible. And in that moment, Emily realized that the journey ahead would require effort, courage, and patience, but that for the first time in a long while, she felt certain that their marriage could heal, that their hearts could reconnect, and that the extraordinary, almost comical encounter at the zoo had done something miraculous. It had forced them to confront the truth of their feelings, acknowledge their unmet needs, and take the first steps toward a deeper, more authentic love, leaving Emily with a mix of relief, excitement, and cautious optimism as they left the zoo together, side by side, hearts aligned yet tender, ready to face whatever challenges and joys lay ahead in the complicated, beautiful journey of rediscovering each other. After the emotional confrontation at the zoo, Emily and Daniel returned home with a mixture of relief, lingering tension, and cautious hope, both aware that what had happened was only the beginning of a journey they could no longer avoid, a journey that required honesty, patience, and the willingness to confront feelings they had long buried beneath the routines of marriage. In the days that followed, Daniel made a conscious effort to notice Emily in ways he hadn't before, simple gestures, small acts of attention, asking about her day with genuine curiosity rather than the perfunctory questions he had been asking for years, and Emily responded with a mix of gratitude and surprise, feeling the warmth of connection she had almost forgotten existed, a warmth that had once been a constant presence in their early days together. Emily realized that the awkward, almost absurd incident at the zoo had been a catalyst, a mirror reflecting the emotional gaps between them, and that if they chose to respond with understanding and care rather than judgment and anger, their marriage could grow stronger than it had ever been, and she felt a renewed sense of determination to embrace that opportunity, to communicate openly, to share her thoughts and feelings without fear of dismissal, and to encourage Daniel to do the same, knowing that vulnerability was the bridge they both needed to cross. One evening, Daniel surprised her by preparing a quiet dinner at home, the table set with candles and her favorite dishes, a gesture so simple yet profoundly meaningful that Emily felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, realizing that the smallest acts of attention carried immense power in rebuilding trust and intimacy. And in that moment, she saw Daniel not as the distant, busy husband she had resented, but as a partner willing to meet her halfway, willing to put effort into their connection, and that acknowledgement sparked a deep emotional response, a mixture of relief, love, and the desire to reciprocate with equal attention and care. Over the next few weeks, they began spending more intentional time together, exploring new hobbies, taking long walks in the park, and even returning to the zoo, not to revisit Coda in the same emotional way, but to share laughter, observation, and the quiet joy of simply being present with each other. And during those visits, Emily noticed Daniel watching her with a mixture of curiosity and affection, a new light in his eyes that had been absent for years, and she felt herself responding with warmth, playfulness, and a sense of emotional freedom she hadn't experienced since their early days of courtship. One afternoon, as they stood near the primate enclosure, watching the gorillas move with grace and strength, Emily turned to Daniel, feeling bold enough to speak the truth that had been lingering in her mind. "I think Coda taught me something important," she said softly, and Daniel smiled, intrigued, waiting for her to continue, and she explained how her bond with the gorilla had reminded her of the importance of attention, presence, and emotional honesty, that it had shown her what she had been missing in their marriage and inspired her to seek it with him instead of in a secret or symbolic attachment. And Daniel nodded, squeezing her hand gently, acknowledging that he too had been awakened by the incident, that it had forced him to see the gaps he had allowed to grow, and that together, they could rebuild their love stronger than before. Their conversations grew deeper, no longer superficial, exploring dreams, fears, and regrets, sharing laughter and quiet tears, and Emily realized that the very vulnerability she had once feared showing him had become the cornerstone of their renewed connection, a bridge built from honesty, empathy, and shared desire to understand each other fully, and she felt a profound sense of relief, joy, and love that had been dormant for far too long. Daniel, in turn, opened up about the pressures he had felt at work, the stress that had consumed him, and the inadvertent neglect that had created emotional distance between them, and Emily listened with empathy, recognizing that the challenges of adult life had affected them both and that their love had never truly faded but had simply been buried under layers of routine, distraction, and unspoken feelings, and in that recognition, she felt gratitude for the absurd yet transformative role the zoo encounter had played, forcing them to confront truths they might have continued to ignore otherwise. As days turned into weeks, the couple began creating new traditions, shared rituals that nurtured emotional closeness, from morning coffee together without distractions to nightly walks where they spoke about anything and everything. And Emily found herself laughing more freely, feeling cherished, and allowing herself to be fully present with Daniel without fear of judgment or misunderstanding. And the mutual attention created a feedback loop of connection that strengthened their bond, deepened their understanding of each other, and restored a sense of intimacy that neither had realized they were missing so profoundly. One evening, while preparing dinner together, Daniel reached across the counter and brushed a strand of hair from Emily's face, a small, tender gesture that made her heart flutter, and she felt the same surge of emotion she had felt on the day he had first seen her with Coda, yet this time it was different. It was grounded, mutual, and full of warmth, and she realized that the lesson of the gorilla had come full circle. The need for connection, attention, and care was not a trivial longing but the foundation of love itself, and now they were both committed to nurturing it consciously, intentionally, and lovingly. Emily found herself reflecting on the absurdity of the initial incident, smiling at the memory of Coda's wise, calm presence and how it had catalyzed such a profound transformation in their relationship, and she recognized that the encounter had been symbolic, a reminder that love requires effort, attentiveness, and emotional courage, and that ignoring small signs of disconnection could allow distance to grow silently, but addressing those signs with honesty and care could rekindle even the most dormant of bonds. And in this realization, Emily felt gratitude for the growth and closeness she now shared with Daniel. As they lay in bed that night, talking quietly about hopes, plans, and dreams, Emily felt a sense of peace she hadn't known for years, a deep understanding that their marriage had not been lost but reborn. Stronger, more resilient, and more emotionally connected, and she knew that the path ahead would have challenges, as all relationships do, yet she felt ready to face them with Daniel, with openness, honesty, and a renewed commitment to nurture their love. And as sleep approached, she held his hand tightly, feeling the warmth, reassurance, and intimacy that had been absent for so long, knowing that this time, they would not let life's distractions and unspoken needs drive a wedge between them. Again, and in that quiet, shared moment, the absurdity of the zoo encounter faded into the background, replaced by the profound joy of two hearts reconnecting, two minds aligned, and two people rediscovering the depth, passion, and tenderness of a love that had always been there, waiting to be awakened through understanding, effort, and emotional presence. And as she drifted to sleep, Emily felt a hopeful certainty that their marriage would thrive, that laughter, warmth, and closeness would continue to grow, and that the lesson of Coda and the zoo, the importance of attention, care, and emotional honesty, would remain a guiding light in their life together, reminding them that love, nurtured carefully and intentionally, could endure anything and flourish even in the most unexpected ways, creating a partnership that was not just safe and stable, but vibrant, passionate, and deeply fulfilling in ways Emily had never imagined possible. And with that thought, she closed her eyes, feeling content, loved, and ready for the future she and Daniel would build together. In the weeks and months following the zoo incident, Emily and Daniel's marriage began to transform in ways neither had expected, as the awkward yet revealing encounter with Coda became a symbol of awakening, a turning point that reminded them both of the importance of presence, attention, and emotional honesty, and they committed themselves to rebuilding their connection with patience, care, and intention. Understanding that the true work of love lay not in grand gestures alone but in daily acts of recognition, empathy, and mutual respect, and from that realization grew a renewed sense of partnership, where conversations flowed easily, laughter returned to their home, and even simple routines, sharing morning coffee, walking in the park, or preparing dinner together, took on new meaning, carrying the warmth of attentiveness and the joy of feeling truly seen by one another. And Emily marveled at how these small, consistent moments of care created a ripple of closeness that strengthened their bond in ways she had never imagined, while Daniel discovered the subtle yet profound power of noticing Emily, asking her about her thoughts, and engaging with her emotions fully instead of allowing distraction or stress to take precedence. And as they explored their city together, visiting old favorite spots and discovering new ones, their laughter intertwined with shared memories, teasing remarks, and quiet glances that spoke volumes about the depth of understanding and renewed intimacy between them. And even returning to the zoo, this time together, they observed the gorillas with shared fascination rather than the private, almost obsessive attachment Emily had felt before, and they laughed at Coda's antics, the memory of the initial incident becoming less of a source of embarrassment and more of a story they could reflect on together, a story that reminded them how far they had come in rebuilding trust and closeness. And Emily realized that the bond she had once sought with Coda was never about replacing Daniel, but about awakening her to what she had been missing in their relationship, the need to be emotionally acknowledged and cherished. And now, with Daniel present and attentive, she could embrace those feelings safely, channeling them into a healthy, loving partnership rather than seeking them elsewhere, and that realization brought her immense relief, gratitude, and hope for the future. As days turned into weeks, the couple deepened their emotional connection, discussing dreams, fears, and desires in ways they had never dared before, sharing vulnerabilities that had been buried under the weight of routine, and as they navigated these conversations, they discovered a renewed passion for life together, a sense of playfulness, curiosity, and tenderness that had been missing for years, and Emily found herself smiling more freely, feeling valued, and reveling in the joy of a partnership where her emotions were met with empathy rather than dismissal, while Daniel, in turn, found a renewed appreciation for Emily's spirit, her intelligence, humor, and capacity for love, recognizing that the moments of tension and confusion they had endured were not signs of failure but opportunities for growth, understanding, and deeper intimacy, and in this awareness, he felt inspired to continue nurturing their bond actively, consistently, and lovingly. One afternoon, as they walked hand in hand through the city streets, Daniel paused and gently squeezed Emily's hand, looking into her eyes with a tenderness that made her heart flutter, and she felt the warmth, reassurance, and emotional closeness that had seemed distant only months before, a feeling of being fully seen, appreciated, and loved, and in that moment, she reflected on the journey they had taken, from isolation and misunderstanding to honesty, vulnerability, and reconnection, and she felt a profound sense of gratitude that the incident with Coda, while strange and initially shocking, had led to such personal growth, mutual understanding, and a renewed sense of love between them. As they returned home that evening, Emily and Daniel found themselves sharing stories, laughter, and quiet moments of reflection, discussing how their priorities had shifted, how their attention to each other had deepened, and how the lessons learned from the unexpected zoo encounter would guide them in maintaining a vibrant, emotionally connected marriage. And Emily felt a surge of hope, recognizing that the work they had done together had not only repaired the cracks in their relationship but had created a foundation for future joy, trust, and emotional intimacy, and she understood that love was not a static state but a living, breathing experience that required awareness, effort, and courage. And now, with Daniel fully engaged, attentive, and emotionally present, they had a chance to nurture it consciously every day, ensuring that the closeness, understanding, and passion they had rediscovered would not fade into the background of routine life. They began planning activities that allowed them to explore shared interests, laugh together, and create new memories that reinforced their emotional bond, and Emily realized that the once private world she had sought with Coda had been a reflection of her longing for emotional engagement and connection, and now, with Daniel beside her, that need could be fulfilled in a real, meaningful way, grounded in human intimacy, communication, and love, and the relief and happiness she felt were profound, reminding her that connection could not be substituted, only nurtured with presence, attention, and honesty. Nights became times of quiet reflection and conversation, where they discussed not only the events of the day but also their feelings, hopes, and future aspirations, sharing dreams they had previously kept to themselves, and through these exchanges, their understanding of one another deepened, creating a level of trust and closeness that felt both exhilarating and comforting, and Emily felt a sense of belonging, warmth, and security that she had missed for years, a knowledge that she and Daniel were aligned emotionally, willing to meet each other's needs, and committed to growing together as partners, lovers, and friends. Even the small moments, like preparing meals side by side, sharing morning coffee, or enjoying a quiet evening on the couch, became infused with meaning and care, as they noticed each other's moods, offered support, and expressed appreciation. And in these moments, Emily realized that the lessons learned from the gorilla encounter were not about the absurdity or humor of the situation, but about the awareness it brought, the need to nurture emotional intimacy before distance could grow, and to actively engage in the partnership rather than taking it for granted, and that awareness brought both of them closer, fostering a renewed sense of love, respect, and admiration for one another. As the seasons changed, their relationship continued to flourish, rooted in the emotional honesty and connection that had been sparked by that strange, unforgettable day at the zoo, and Emily felt a profound sense of gratitude that the unusual circumstances had led them to examine their hearts, communicate their needs, and rediscover the depth and beauty of their love, and she understood that their journey was ongoing, that challenges would arise, but with awareness, effort, and mutual care, they could navigate them together, ensuring that the warmth, closeness, and emotional fulfillment they had regained would continue to grow, strengthened by the lessons of presence, attention, and empathy. And in this understanding, Emily felt a lasting peace, hope, and joy, knowing that their marriage was not only intact but thriving, vibrant, and filled with the love, intimacy, and emotional richness they had once feared lost, and that together, they could face whatever came next with courage, trust, and a shared commitment to keep nurturing the extraordinary connection they had rediscovered, leaving them both fulfilled, connected, and deeply in love as they embraced the life they had chosen to rebuild together, strengthened by vulnerability, honesty, and the transformative power of truly seeing and valuing one another.